light's on.
Okay.
You have to turn your microphone on.
Thanks. Okay, we'll get started. First thing we'll do is a Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I know Kat's not here yet, but Alina had contacted me, so she has an excused absence for a medical issue this evening. We hope she's okay. Also, I think we can do the minutes review first, and then I'm going to have Rep Tur come up and speak to, under old business, item A, have him go first, so that way he doesn't have to stay here if he doesn't want, and it'll allow Dan to hear that presentation as well, since I know you have to leave for the school committee meeting at 6 o'clock. So with that, I would take a motion or to accept the minutes from the April 21st meeting.
I might have missed the email, but I didn't get that. Did anyone else get them?
That's what I was about to look for.
Am I supposed to send them?
Yes.
I am?
Yeah, I sent them to you.
Oh.
So we will do that next.
Apologize. So this is my fault. I guess I was supposed to forward
We're still sorting out our roles.
I would guess I was supposed to forward the minutes that
Just as long as I didn't miss them.
I was
So we'll
like,
just do
oh,
it.
I need to.
All right. Apologize for that. So what we'll do is we'll review the minutes for both the meetings and the next meeting. So with that, like I said, I would like to take item 6, old business, the first one, A. We have the state rep Tur here to review. We had discussed a little bit, I know Dan brought up last time, this bill, SB 297, relative to pooled risk management programs and its impact on the local healthcare costs. Rep Tur, would you like to? Thank you so much for being here tonight and for helping us start to understand this legislation.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me and thanks for bringing it up. It's kind of an unusual bill. When you first brought it up, I looked and I said, oh, it passed unanimously out of the Senate, so can't understand that it would be a super controversial bill, but that sort of masked kind of the process that it took. So it was, a bill that was basically proposed by the Secretary of State, who asked the Senate to draft it. And came in sort of late. I don't think it probably got the full level of review that maybe it would have otherwise. And I think you should all have a copy of a presentation that I sent around and some other information about it. So I went to the House hearing on it. So it went to House Commerce. And so I attended that hearing to listen in on the different perspectives, and it is very complex as a bill goes, and it's also very much in flux as a bill that sort of came unanimously out of the Senate. The Secretary of State's office has already proposed an amendment that the committee hasn't taken up yet officially, but it was kind of distributed at that meeting, so nobody really is exactly sure what it says, but the presentation that I sent around was from a man named Michael Kutu, who is on the select board in Rye, testified at the House Commerce hearing, and really was probably the clearest voice at the House Commerce hearing, partly because he's been involved in this since we originally created the 5B statute that allows there to be these, risk pools in the state of New Hampshire. So he knows where they come from. He's been involved in, that area for his entire career. And now, I think even he said he's sort of, surprised to see it coming back up again. But you all were correct to flag it as something that could be potentially problematic at the town level. And I can run through as much or as little as of the guts of it, but I'll give you the top level and then we can dig in more if you want, which is, so these risk pools, and thank you, Letty, for confirming which ones we're part of. They're optional. Towns don't have to use risk pools. They can use private, and they can use various forms of the risk pools, or they can also use private insurance. And it's basically health, workers' comp, liability, but most of the a lot of the municipalities, there's some numbers in that presentation about how many, but a lot of them use it. And, the general consensus was, going to the private market unless you have to would generally cost more and you'd get less. The sort of hidden thing, I guess, that's gone on with these risk pools all along is they're specifically excluded from being a form of insurance. And so if they were insurance, the insurer, the risk pool itself, would have to bear all the risk. And they just have to set their pricing accordingly, et cetera. By being excluded as insurance, they're not technically insurance organizations, but they also aren't sort of held to the standards that maybe they would have been if they were insurance organizations. Particularly, they're not made to carry any particular level of reinsurance, or I don't know if you all know, but most insurers will cover up to a certain amount, and then if they have claims that exceed that, either collectively or individually, they can buy insurance that against those particularly high claims. And so what has happened all along was basically implicitly these risk pools couldn't, or most people agree that they couldn't bill the members, which would be the towns, for any excess costs over what they had sort of priced for. And it was kind of ambiguous, at least from what I understand, what would happen if they got to that level. The thing that sort of tripped this, I guess, was one of the risk pools called Interhealth. I think, sorry, if I could look up the name of it. Interlocal. It's called Interlocal. Basically, was found to have insufficient funds to cover their needs, and essentially declared that they were leaving, at the end of June, they'll be closing up shop. And that sort of set off, I guess, some red flags, my understanding, in the Secretary of State's office saying, what are we going to do to basically avoid having these, risk pools not sufficiently capitalized so that they can make sure that they can survive. And the solution that he came up with is SB 297. And it made some fairly significant changes in the way that these pools operate. It set some thresholds for testing their, liquidity levels, kind of an odd way, like depending on whether it's health or whether it's, liability. They test them in different ways, but essentially they set some different standards, one that's sort of a warning level, one that's kind of a actionable level. And then what they can do now under this, if this were to pass, was they could tell the risk pools that they have to increase their capitalization. And the way that at least it was initially proposed is they would then be able to ask the municipalities, within 30 days to produce, additional resources that are not budgeted for, obviously, And the other thing they can do is they can put them into receivership. So literally, like, get rid of the board of the entire operation, replace it with, some other group that, that theoretically would implement these changes. There's a lot of sub-levels to that in terms of like what they were requiring. One of the big things was they were also going to have, so this would be called an assessment in this new language when you ask the members to contribute more money. There's a whole bunch of formulas about what you might have to contribute, to reach a certain level. But one of the things they'd originally proposed is that each town would also have to create a capital reserve of, equal to 4% of the total, right? So, that was pointed out that, towns just can't create capital reserves. They have to be voted into existence. And it's all well and good if you want to say Brentwood needs one, but the Brentwood voters might not accept that. And then what, So there were a whole bunch of sort of, red flags raised. And it was interesting because the different risk pools, they weren't all opposed, because theoretically what this lets them do is collect more money up front, And so the one that I think caused the most fervor was Health Trust, which we use and is the largest and, basically provides in particular the health insurance, but I think they do the other markets as well for a lot of municipal workers. And they made a statement when this came out that essentially said, if this passes, we will leave the New Hampshire market, which of course was a fairly dramatic statement that sent everyone running. It's not entirely clear, whether any, like the current amendment that they're proposing would help that in any way. And there was some assertion that maybe they were taking an initial position, that would give them some leverage. But some of the other risk pools, like Primex was there, I think, and I believe, said that they were supportive of it, So I think the underlying truth is that there probably is a not great situation with these risk pools not having, any requirement to reinsure themselves or any way to pay if they or increase their capital if they need to. The solution is, I think, where the problems come in. Because it really hadn't gotten a very full-throated review considering the sort of level of invasiveness that goes into it. The other thing that Mr. Kutu from Rye pointed out was moving the entire oversight of the pool. In his opinion, it sounded like he basically was saying shouldn't really be under the Secretary of State's office. They're not really equipped to do insurance type things. They don't really know, the rules. So these 4% thresholds and, 12% capitalization levels, were kind of crude. Insurance companies have more sophisticated ways of estimating what their reserve level should be. And also if you're under the insurance commission, there's a statewide, essentially pool for, sort of like what happened with the Pension Guarantee Trust, where if they were to collapse, there's another pool that could get, tapped into to make people whole. And there's an interview in one of the papers, Concord Monitor Union Leader, I can't remember that, where the Secretary of State said, we will work to protect the interests of the insured if something happens. And there was a big question about what that means, because that could be many, many millions of dollars, and it's not clear that exists. So there is, so Commerce Committee works a little differently than some of the others. They rely a lot on work sessions, and this one obviously needs one. So there is a work session on Wednesday. And if anyone ever has trouble, you can watch remotely any of these committee hearings, and you can also watch them after the fact. And if you watch them after the fact, pro tip is you can speed up the replay time so you don't spend as long and skip a little bit. But so I'll try and tune in after. I've got my committee's meeting at the same time, so I can't attend that one. But yeah, very interested to see where it goes. And I think I mentioned in the email, my first job out of grad school was, basically as a risk manager for self-insured county and all of its municipalities. And so, a lot of the underlying concepts, we're talking 35 years ago, but, they make sense, and it does seem like there's a range of possible ways to resolve it. But the smooth ride it got through the Senate is definitely probably not the way it's going to get through the House. But I can't tell you what's going to happen. I mean, they could ultimately, pass it as is. They could adopt the amendment. They could amend it in other ways, and that's remains to be seen. Like I said, in this document, Mr. Kutu put out the what I think he had gotten a copy of that amendment from the committee, but it's not online yet because the committee hasn't essentially introduced it, so we can't read it, but he summarized it. And it has a couple of provisions, but the biggest one was pulling back on the town level reserves. So that's enough talking. Let me see. Does that make sense? Does that help in any way? I know it doesn't help, but the ultimate question is what's actually going to happen.
No, I mean, thank you. I think it's really helpful. And yeah, I think obviously our biggest concern, or my biggest concern, would be the impact to our costs on health insurance in Brentwood. Like if we have to fund that 4%, well, those are the things that we would definitely have to know about and plan for. But I know at this time it's really too early for that. So, but I think what's good is that at least we have the communication and dialogue going already, so that if you do hear something that starts to, again, impact our budget process, we definitely need to know that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll definitely stay involved with this, if it doesn't go through, maybe even be involved in whatever comes next in terms of solving it. But the one thing I should have mentioned is my understanding of this amendment is it removes the mandate to create a reserve, but it also enables the creation of a reserve. And so I think their understanding might be that, towns might end up having to do this anyway if, there's this sort of questionable situation. And the biggest piece is this idea that you could get assessed fairly rapidly in the middle of your budget, and then essentially come up with their example. He spelled out a couple of examples where even a small town could be well into six figures if
Right.
If depending on how big the deficit is. And one other thing that he pointed out is a lot of the failure of that one pool wasn't the result of necessarily poor financial management or anything. What happened was during COVID, nobody utilized, and so they built up this huge reserve. But then shortly, either right before or right after, there was a rule passed that said you can't hold that reserve.
Give it
So within 1 year, you have to basically return most of it to, the members. And so basically there was this big drop. They built up a big reserve. They weren't able to hold it, for several years. And so after COVID, there was a big increase, sort of the pent-up demand hit. And that, I think, from what I understand, had a lot to do with why they, sort of became insolvent, or whatever term you want to use. So, interestingly, it wasn't even really a core problem with the business model that led to it. So hopefully they'll find a way forward that doesn't sort of leave a big open question for the towns. But yeah, I mean, as this takes shape, depending on what comes out, it'll either impose some things that we'll have to take into account going forward, or it might present some questions that might be worth thinking about in terms of reserves going forward. Yeah.
I mean, I have one question, and I'm just curious, because I think when I read, it seemed like the Secretary of State's office had this view that Health Trust was like bankrupt or in financial trouble. But then Health Trust issued this, like, their own statement responding to the Secretary of State saying, no, we're not.
Right.
And I just thought it was, like I said, who's right? Like, and I didn't know if you had seen or heard anything, like, do you know, like, who is right? Or because I don't see how they both can be right. How can one say that they're basically bankrupt,
So
and
my-
the other one says they're
So
not.
I don't know about bankrupt, but my understanding is a similar situation to what you're describing. I think all insurance companies had a dip in claims during 2020 to early 2021. And then there was this pent up release of people all of a sudden getting all the medical treatment that they had skipped or weren't able to get. And so I think a lot of places saw that increase, including Health Trust. And so their numbers are lower than the Secretary of State would like, maybe, but they're not to the point where this other smaller group maybe they seem to have weathered the storm better than this small.
I think that's as near as I can read the tea leaves from all this stuff. I think that's about it. Is that these new thresholds that the Secretary of State put forward, set levels that Health Trust, because they're basically saying we can see our capital reserves building back up again. We know we're basically coming out of this, but if we had to adhere to your standard immediately, then we probably won't be able to, meet that. And so, both things can be true. They basically feel like they're financially sound, but they also might be short of what the Secretary of State's vision
Recommendation,
for that is. So, yeah, lots of moving parts and a lot of people's, benefits and coverage on the line. So,
Right.
Again, it was one of those things that it was surprising when I first saw it that it came out of the Senate, unanimous, and sort of made me originally think, well, hopefully, there's some good thinking, and I'm not saying there isn't good thinking behind it, but, just the process seemed like it was a bit shunted. So definitely, I'll keep an eye on the bill, and, as things come out, I'll send you the status updates. But, it'll be interesting to hear what happens at the work session, because that's when they'll introduce the amendment, and then you'll get a feel maybe for where the Commerce Committee is at with it. And then ultimately, it's going to go to the floor of the House for a vote. And so, again, I'll make the decision as it gets closer what it is. What I've heard so far, it sounds like in its current form, it would need to be opposed. And, the Municipal Association, I believe, is on that, position as well. So, but, a lot can happen between now and when it gets voted on.
Do you think there's any reason at this point to start looking at commercial markets for municipalities, specifically
I mean, I
Brentwood
know
or
people have
SAU
asked that,
16?
There's
and I
no
think,
reason not to. I mean, if we can do that anytime, right? Whether or not Health Trust.
Well, I think it would be a bigger lift if the SAU is pooled between, right, like the co-op and the Swayze is included in that. Then we're like,
I mean, the town at no point, my understanding, will ever be pooled with.
right.
So I guess it's a two-part question.
Right.
There's no reason for the town not to do that at any time.
yeah, I mean, asking for, a broker to start working something up is not,
Right.
a terrible thing. I think it's probably earlier than like it absolutely has to start
Right.
happening, but it doesn't, I wouldn't say it's necessarily wrong to do. But the general, read from this person in Rye in particular was that, at the moment, unless something changes, the commercial market's going to come in with higher costs and
Right.
lower coverage. So, but yeah, but who knows? I mean,
Right.
all these groups are competing. I mean, that was a big subtext to the whole thing, is that, are these groups, even though they're sort of just risk pools, are they underpricing their participation to compete with each other? And is that what's driving the under, capitalization? So, yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone who's in the insurance market is trying to attract people.
Right.
So who knows? The private insurance market might, respond to this too.
What's the earliest if let's say this passed somehow with like smooth sailing flying, what's the earliest that this could be applicable to us?
That's a good question. I'll have
I
to
think-
look at the bill. They usually say when it becomes effective. I think it's, sorry, I shouldn't guess.
Did we talk about this last meeting?
I think we did. I think it's
think
pretty
it's
much like
next-
the next day, or so it depends on what the risk pools do in response.
Right.
If Health Trust decided we're out, then I think the town would be good through the end of 25, but the school district, you're on a July to July, right? So you could be out of luck in a couple months.
60 days after passage is what the current bill says.
Okay.
So pretty
That-
quick.
That kind of backs into, at what point could it be possible that we would look for commercial quotes?
I mean, we could look for, like I said, the town could look for commercial quotes whenever.
Mm.
There's nothing
I was just curious.
stopping us other than,
Yeah, we're going to definitely discuss that under subcommittees, for sure.
Yeah, so, 60 days is pretty quick. It doesn't even get you into the next, years. Because there's also a provision, and I'm not totally clear how this works, where essentially even if you leave the risk pool, you can still be assessed after the fact for the time that you were in there. So, there's a lot of things that cause red flags to go up on the bill. But kind of a good thing for our legislative process that, it has to go through all of these levels, and it definitely, got flagged in the House pretty quickly and pretty strongly. So then there's people very knowledgeable thinking it through. So
Eric, this
Yeah.
is really helpful. Thanks for the updates, and obviously it has great impact on Swayze School as well as SAU 16, all under Health Trust right now. We also had a private citizen come and comment in the last BudCom meeting. Dave Massey, I think, has one or two kids at Swayze School currently.
yeah.
And came for the sole purpose of expressing deep concern with two education-related bills. I'm about to head to the school board meeting after this, and so while you're here, would really appreciate your perspective, any updates, and I think relevant for this group as well because they all heard Dave Massey's concerns about open enrollment was one.
Yep.
House Bill 741.
Yep. So that's left the House already. Did pass the House. There's a lot of things that passed the House that could have implications. The voucher expansion bill it passed the House and got put in the budget, making it sort of impossible
so
to
what-
veto on its own.
yeah, that's just now happening.
What's that?
The voucher expansion is just now happening because it's tied to the budget, or is the budget still not passed? There's a
So-
chance, there's no chance.
So there's no line item veto in New Hampshire. So basically, and I'll just give you my 2 cents. I think sticking policy things in the budget, I mean, that one at least has a budgetary impact, but you could have just had the budget amount that it required in, but it was more than that. There's a number of policy things that got put in the budget, what's called HB2, the rider bill that has all the policy behind the budget. But people have started in the last few cycles slipping in pure policy bills into the HB2. So there's a bill that I spoke to on the floor about, gender use of bathrooms and things like that also passed the House and also then got put into the budget. So, I think the thinking behind those is, the Senate could kill that bill, or the governor could veto that bill. But if you put it in the budget, it's kind of an all or nothing. The budget will either, if it gets through the Senate, will either be signed or not signed. And so it raises the stakes if someone wants to remove a certain thing. Which again, not my favorite way of approaching problems. Especially when we have 800 specific bills in the House alone, and seems like slamming it all together into this giant rider bill is just not my favorite. Let's just say.
So just to clarify, because I'm not sure if Mr. Massey, so who pays for the vouchers?
So their I should know the answer to this question. I'm gonna embarrass myself.
No, that's okay.
Um,
We're putting you on the spot, so.
The
Or where does the money come from, maybe is a better question?
yeah, and I do know the answer, but I'm not coming up with it at the moment because I think you know there is a direct state impact to the budget for the voucher bills, but I'm not sure. Some money comes out of the local
And
school system.
That's all right. If you get the answer, just send it to me and I will
Yep.
forward it to the whole committee.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're better off doing that. Than
What's
to
that?
try- You're better off doing that than just trying to
Yeah,
take
I'm
a
not gonna
guess at it.
guess. I'm
Yeah,
not gonna
yeah.
guess.
Thank
No,
you.
that's,
but-
if you knew off the top of your head, I think the answer is it comes from the state, but the
I know.
towns fund the state, so.
I know a part of it is in the state budget, so that part has to come from the state. But I'm not sure if the towns in any way have to contribute back for that. So I'll look at that. Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts in this budget this year. So yeah, I mean, and you know, there's a lot of budget education related, you know, bills going through, you know, in many different ways. So, you know, if you, I got to say thank you for flagging this because otherwise, you know, it probably would have bubbled to the surface. I mean, just even the risk pool bill to begin with, but all of these, you know, if there's things that you're hearing, you know, let me know. I mean, I do get emails from people sometimes about these and try and respond, but you know, if anything that comes up to you all as a board or committee, sorry, let me know. I mean, it's you know, it's a lot easier for me to dig into these things, and there's, you know, in each of these committees, that's where all the real details come out, and so you know, can always look at the committee or talk to someone on the committee and find out, like, you know, what really happened, because there's like literally not a single bill where the committee hearing didn't change something about your understanding of what you thought it was going to be. So anyway,
Any other?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and then just to follow up on that other bill, it was that the open enrollment bill. That one passed separately from the budget already, and is it still in the Senate?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, I don't think it's come out of the Senate yet, but I could look.
Okay, yeah, because I think last time we discussed how like there wasn't good guidance on like how the additional students, like how we pay for that. And if
We
there's,
just have to pay for them.
or if we just have to pay for that, or like, you know,
Yeah, I believe the sending district does have to provide resources to the receiving district.
Only 80%.
Yeah, I was going to say, but not the full amount.
But and the receiving district has to have the resources to meet that. I mean, there's a whole form, like,
Yeah.
because if you don't have the resources, you can say we don't have the resources, but there's a process.
okay.
did read
I
up a
think
little
last time we didn't know what
Yeah,
what that looked like. And
Yeah,
is it
I-
like every town could just be like, we love Swayze School, and just like here comes double
Right,
the amount of
right.
students.
Yeah.
I
And
think
what
we'd
kind
be
of
limited
recourse?
by capacity.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. There's resource. You
Okay.
can, yeah.
I hadn't looked into this any further
I,
since we
I
spoke
did
last.
look at that one.
Okay,
but I
good.
didn't.
Yeah,
really
I think
it
both
would
of
come
those,
up.
they're, you know, one of the concerns is predictability. You know, it sort of makes it harder to know what you're facing the next year, which already is somewhat variable and hard to predict. But anyway, well, I'll follow up if I see any. I will get the details on that, on the payment for the vouchers and where that comes from. You know, and this is just an expansion. I mean, it's the same underlying program that's been there for a few years. This just basically removes the income cap.
So anyone can get it.
Yeah, so it used to go to roughly $112,000 for a family of four, and now it's just any family can ask for it.
Thank you, Eric.
Any other questions for the rep? Eric, thank you again. Really appreciate it, and thank you for sending this presentation from Mr. Kotu. It was really helpful, and Dan, thanks again. Thank you, and Mr. Massey, who was here, brought it up to kind of flag it. And again, great working together. We'll keep this up as we go forward.
Okay. And
Thank
if
you.
there's specific things, you know, this person from Rye, I don't want to offer his services, but you know, he did sort of make it clear that he can be, you know, contacted, so I can pass along questions if there's something specific, but
Thank you.
hopefully it'll all bubble out in the rest of the process.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks for all you all do to keep the finances moving on track, in spite of the best efforts from Congress.
We will try, right? Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna run. I have a proposal.
Okay, with that, I would go back to item 4, updates. And I think we'll take the school board first, Dan, since then you'll be able to leave to go to your meeting.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Jim. So the big question coming out of my updates from last week was about the solar, like the bond and the tax credit and the status of that. We haven't had a school board meeting since we last met. I'm about to go there now. And Molly O'Keefe, the finance director, is always on top of this and giving updates in those meetings. So I'm about to get another update from her in just a minute. But I did talk to Molly late last week and made sure I was fully understanding of the status as it stood as of Thursday or something like that. She was on spring break, but still responsive. So basically there's two pieces to this. There's the bond and there's a repayment schedule, and then there's the tax credit. The tax credit is not actually a tax credit because schools are tax exempt, so we can just consider it to be revenue. But I'll start with the bond. So we entered into bond sale in January. The reason that we entered in January is because there's basically bonds can happen at 2 different times during the year. So leading up to January, we had like a bond anticipation note. Once January hit, we entered into bond sale. Once we got the final bond numbers and rates for this year, for this fiscal year, there ended up being around a $1,000 reduction from what we had anticipated. So Molly communicated that to Jack Mitchell at the time. In order to connect the dots, I have these communications too that I can forward along to this group. So that was accounted for a few months back. Moving forward, the bond is going to be repaid on a fixed repayment schedule. I have that document, so I can share that with the group here as well. So moving forward, it'll be very predictable on a fixed bond repayment schedule. So that piece should be pretty straightforward. And then as it relates to the tax credit, and air quotes, because it's actually revenue, because schools are tax exempt, the total tax credit that we're asking for from the IRS and expecting is $198,000. We could not apply for that credit until the panels were active. So as soon as the panels were active, Molly applied for a number via the IRS website. She got the tax number and then immediately sent that number to the IRS on April 10th via certified mail. So now the ball is in the court of the IRS to process that and send us the $198,000 that we're expecting, which will be tracked as revenue. They don't have the phone number that used to exist for people to call to like get updates on these types of things. There's some message saying like this is no longer a supported area or whatever. Nonetheless, Molly has some email communication. She's seen some success there, and she's all over it. So that's where we're at right now. And as soon as I get further updates from Molly, I'll make sure I share it with the group here. And as far as sharing documents, should I, like the bond repayment schedule, prior communications between Molly and Jack, like anything that would be helpful to just make sure we have the full picture here? Is it easiest to just forward that stuff along via email to this group?
Just
with
BCC
attachments?
everyone.
Okay.
So that we can't accidentally create a meeting.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good,
Oh,
right.
I got you.
Yeah.
Understood.
I was told to do
Reply
the
or
same thing on
file.
cemetery. That's how you can do it.
So I'll send it all
Safely.
to myself and then BCC.
BCC, yeah, exactly.
Because then if anyone has a question, they can respond just to you.
Yep. I like that.
reply all is tricky.
But that's it for me.
Okay.
If anyone has further questions on the solar stuff, I'm happy to answer it to the best of my ability. I'm also about to head to the school board meeting, so I can bring anything back to that group there too.
I would love to see that repayment schedule when it's available, but that's.
I have it now. I'll just forward it, or not forward it. I'll send it to BCC.
Does Molly still give you that one sheet and then the full budget every month? Like the one sheet summary?
Yes.
Could you forward those to us?
Yeah,
Me, us.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Send it all to Jim and BCC the rest of it.
Whatever.
Okay.
However I can get it.
And what's the, just to make sure I'm sending the right thing?
You can just say Letty wants the, well, because you're getting pretty close to the end of the year, so I'm guessing that you're having you're able to kind of get rid of some of the encumbrances that aren't needed anymore, so you're gonna see how much unreserved fund balance you actually have.
Yeah,
So I'm just curious about what that is.
yeah. And I think I know the one pager that you're talking about,
Yeah.
specific document.
Any other questions for Dan?
Nope.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Dan.
Dan.
And just so you know, you have all of the slides that I'll be presenting to them. You have them. I
Yeah.
sent them to everyone.
Mhm.
If there's any sort of question you have, whatever, just contact me.
Sounds good.
Invite your friends.
right, right.
Make it a
I was
party.
snoring.
Tempt them with snacks.
I was at the library with the kids the other day and talking to our library director who's watching the whole thing from start to finish.
See?
Wow, people do watch this.
Okay. Letty, I guess you have the update from the select board.
Yes. Yes. The first thing is I also have a pending legislation that is on the radar. It's actually about tax caps, which is exciting. It's House Bill 200. And the main concern that I have about it, everyone can feel however they want to feel about it, but the main concern I have is that it would be retroactively applying to all communities that have tax caps. So for us, where we just adopted a tax cap, if this passes, we would be held to it even though we didn't know it was going to be there when we voted on it.
Mm.
So I suggest everyone go look at House Bill 200, and if they have feelings, to email Senator Gannon about it. Yes. And I believe that it is expected to pass the Senate, but can't hurt to let people know how you feel. I don't know for sure because I haven't seen the agenda yet, but I anticipate tomorrow night there's going to be talk about the accounting and finance situation as it currently stands in town. At one point, there had been talk about how we move forward from here, because as of right now, as everyone's heard me say a bunch of times, no one's doing it. So do we hire somebody? Do we rearrange something here? Or how that gets done still is to be seen, but that will definitely have a financial impact because Gabby made a face.
I was reading that bill and missed the part of you saying if we need to hire somebody. Can you
Yeah,
go back?
so right now,
What's the implication?
nobody's doing finance or
Yes.
accounting. Yep.
Yes.
Jillian's still doing all the stuff that she was doing before, so she's still doing all the data entry and the day-to-day billing stuff, but none of the accounting type stuff is getting done.
Recs. Yeah, the reconciliations.
Ambrose, as treasurer, is making sure that the bank has the money where we think it should be,
Yeah,
but that is in no way currently tied to the system that we use.
correct.
So I anticipate that's going to have a financial impact. We're going to have to, the select board's going to have to decide what to do.
Mm.
Whether we hire somebody, whether we contract somebody, full-time, part-time, it's unclear. But that's going to be discussed tomorrow, so I expect at the next meeting I'll have more information about that expense upcoming And I think that's it. Oh, we have, so tomorrow we have a building committee meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and we have 5 RFQs, so we're gonna actually have choices for the municipal building project, which is exciting. Cool. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And actually, HB 200,
Mhm.
I think it's in one of my slide decks, actually, on the 10% rule on the last page. So it's interesting we both caught that bill. And I'll just mention it briefly when I get to that slide deck.
Okay.
Okay. So number 5 says budgets to review. I don't suppose we don't have that yet. So we'll get right into old business. B, I taken the action item from last meeting regarding the impact of warrants that were passed at town meeting that contain the clause from unreserved fund balance, no amount to be raised from taxation. We had discussed about, their impact on the budget, fund balance, tax rate, and tax cap. So if we could turn on the monitor, I could
Oh, yeah.
share the.
Pass that.
And anyone who's watching, if someone wanted to get a copy of this after the meeting, I could make a copy. It's also online. If you look under our meeting, this evening's meeting, I believe we have the agenda, and under packet are all of these slide decks. What's that?
On that side.
The agenda is not posted online? I think it's no, it didn't get posted late. The agenda was posted on either Thursday or Friday. The packet got posted, I believe, yesterday, the packet. I believe if you look under Budget Committee,
He's right. It's not. I mean, the website's just a courtesy anyway, but that's good to know.
I was gonna say, I'm seeing both of those things.
Budget Committee.
Mhm.
So I'm right here.
Yeah, if
So
you go to the meeting, everything's there.
right
Go
here.
up to the meeting, it's not there. I know it's there, but if you go up,
Oh, is it not?
That's what they were clicking on. That. They were clicking on this. And that's
Oh, okay. I was gonna say.
I will find out why they're not.
I'm really.
If I have to post them in both places or how that works, but. No, don't be sorry. I'm not sure why they're not, or how you get them in both places. I didn't make this. I don't have access to the Budget Committee as of yet.
You probably did it the same way you always do it, right? Okay. Well.
So it is online on the website somewhere, but if someone wants a copy, they can just ask. I can make a copy after the meeting for them.
No, and it's in the agenda and minutes area, so, I mean, people can find it now.
That's just
but-
not usually where,
Yeah, exactly. It's just not usual spot.
let me see if I can figure out why.
Okay, so in 2025, the appropriation approved by legislative body at town meeting, oops, sorry about that. The warrant articles were approved by the legislative body containing the language from unreserved fund balance, no amount to be raised from taxation. There were 4 warrants: the front-end loader, highway vehicles, the rec department expanded part-time position, and establishing a master plan expendable trust fund. And the total of those warrants was $335,611. When I spoke to DHRA regarding these warrants and how they're treated, she made sure she told me that, well, anytime you have an expenditure, you must have an appropriation, and she referred me to RSA 32.3, paragraphs 1 and 2, where they define appropriate, and appropriation. So I just put it here to let you know that's where she sent me. So our approved appropriation was $7.2 million. There was 6.8 roughly million of operating budget and 445 $1,000 of warrants. Of that, as I said, 335,611 of those warrants were declared to be unreserved fund surplus at town meeting by the legislative body. And we're only allowed to use, now that that happened, the money that was declared in those warrants to be used from unreserved fund, it is no longer unreserved. They are actually declared surplus and can only be used for the purpose mentioned in that warrant. In October, when we set the tax rate, the following values will be submitted to NHDRA. So what I highlighted in green there, the total appropriation line, that will include, we discussed this, so that the warrants do show up in that total appropriation. Where it gets offset is that there's a line called fund balance voted surplus. And that line will contain, I'm putting 335,611 because that was the total of the warrants. To be honestly, I believe we spent less on the loader. If we do spend, I believe what DRA and the town administrator said to me was that it will stay in fund balance. It gets returned to fund balance. But
Right, but we still have to take it out, and then if it doesn't get used, it'll go back into unrestricted fund balance at the
Right.
end of the year.
so the total appropriations, again, that line includes everything that was approved at town meeting, the operating budget as well as all warrants. And that 335, again, is listed as fund balance voted surplus. I put $1 in there as the fund balance offset. That is because the fund balance to reduce taxes is determined by the select board, probably in September, October timeframe when we do the tax rate. So how does this impact the tax cap? So per RSA 32.5B1, paragraph subsection A, it states, if the local taxes raised for the prior year were reduced by, and I put the word any in red because both DRA and the NHMA attorney both told me like that's the key word there where it says any fund balance brought forward from the previous year, the amount of such reduction shall be added back and included in the amount to which the tax cap is applied under paragraph 1. So like I said, I verified with DRA and the NHMA legal that, so our tax cap base is basically going to be equal to the very bottom line where it says net required local tax effort. You will add back both of those lines, whatever, in our case, the fund balance voted surplus, that 335,611 will get added back. And then whatever fund balance to reduce taxes is voted, is selected by the select board, both of those numbers get added back. And I just say that in this example, the quote, local taxes raised for the prior year, which is the base for the tax cap, so that would be the base number that the 4% is multiplied by, would be equal to $5,314,745, or basically that 4,979,133 plus the voted surplus of 335,611 plus whatever fund balance, in this case, $1. I think that's all for this. I think I covered everything that was asked, if there's any. And again, first of all, I'll apologize. I know I tend to be long-winded on these slides, but I would rather share more information with you as the board. My wife says it's too much and it's too whatever, but I feel like I'd rather with my partners here share anything that I have to make sure that we're all clear on this stuff. And if there's something anyone has any questions on, I definitely can try to answer that.
Yeah, my only question, it's not yet. My only question is, and this is another part of the bill that was added last fall, so it's one of the ones that kind of nobody knows what it means. So, estimated amount of local taxes to be raised for the fiscal year shall include the operating budget and all other warrant articles with a tax impact. They confirmed that even though things paid for with fund balance voted surplus do not have a tax impact, that still gets added
I-
back in?
I verified this exact example with DRA and NHMA, that all appropriations get put into that top line, all. So any warrant,
Yes.
warrant that has tax impact means it has dollars that are going to be spent in that year.
Dollars that are gonna be spent in that.
Including,
Does that mean we have to account for stuff that we encumbered? Because we're spending those dollars in this year?
I didn't ask them that question.
Okay.
Encumbrances, I thought, are supposed to be dealt with on a form that are filled out at the end of the year. Isn't there a form that the select board fills out and submits for encumbrances, like
Definitely
that there's a
not.
contract, this or that?
Nope, we just approve them. I don't know about any forms. But that would also be money from last year that we're spending this year.
Yeah, I don't know how that applies to the budget.
Oh, it definitely applies to the budget because, like, for example, we encumbered money for salt. And so the first couple loads of salt that Wayne bought this year did not hit the budget. They hit the encumbrance, but that's still an expense that we incurred this year, so. But we can roll with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it answered the question. I think I was like you, I wasn't sure how it worked, but I think
Okay.
it's pretty clear now. And it makes sense, and it doesn't, so these warrants that utilize, if the legislative body determines that they want to use it and they vote it as surplus, it does not hurt us with the tax cap because it's gonna get added back in. It's not.
Does it benefit us in any way then it also
Well-
doesn't benefit us then? Because if we
But-
use surplus, it doesn't remove that.
And maybe I'll save my comment on the benefits to fund balance till I get to the tax
No, I mean,
example, because
using fund balance.
I believe using fund balance for one-time purchases like that is the perfect use for fund balance. Because rather than offsetting recurring expenses like whatever, salaries, wages, or just as a one-time tax holiday for
But
people.
that's what we did this year. We use unreserved fund balances for several recurring expenses.
Well, the loader's not a recurring expense, it's a one-time
No,
expense.
but the person at the rec department and the
And
Wayne's,
funding
the capital reserve for plow trucks is.
Right.
Actually, all three of those bottom ones are recurring.
Right. The establish a master plan expendable trust fund of $8,500. Is that going to be every year?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well,
And
I
the,
thought that one was every, like, however many years, because I thought that's why we
Yeah,
took it out of
that's-
the budget, because it's like every.
yeah, it's every 7 years or something. They're
Yeah.
planning on doing it in 7 years.
Right.
Rec person is definitely a salary,
Correct.
like you mentioned.
correct.
And then we add to that highway vehicle capital reserve fund every year because Wayne's trucks are expensive.
Right.
And it was at like next to zero.
It was, because we bought a surprise
Yeah.
truck.
Yes.
Last year.
So
So
he's got a lot of.
are you saying
truck
that that
needs
is
coming
not
up.
how we would use the unreserved fund balance moving
I would
forward?
say the legislative body can use it any way they want. I mean, they can vote that as long as the money's available. They can vote at town meeting to put that clause in there.
Okay. I thought you made the motion at town meeting, so that's why I was asking on a couple of these, but that's,
I believe I did on the loader. I think I did.
okay.
Some of them I think were already in there. I did not make. the
No,
motion
none of them
on
were in
those.
there. We added all of them.
No, I think the $8,500 was already in there.
Okay.
I believe it was.
The other,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we just took that.
So,
out of
but-
the budget
but again,
and
I
the
guess-
warrant article.
I
And
guess what I'm saying is, the way I thought this would work, and it sounds like I'm wrong, because this gets added back in to the total. So if we wanted to buy something that was a one-time expense, loader, whatever, using unreserved fund balance doesn't really help us in terms of the tax cap, because it gets added back in anyway. The expense is the expense is the expense, no matter how we fund
Yeah, I
it.
think you're absolutely correct. It has
Okay.
no impact on tax cap impact because it's in the appropriation, but then it gets subtracted, but then it gets added back to the, right?
So
to the
really,
tax
it's just the
effort.
total appropriation number that we need to care about. We don't have to care about any of the fund balance at all.
So basically, I think if you're trying to reword it to say, okay, what is the tax cap number? It's really, it depends on the total appropriation minus revenue. And then you have to add back whatever we have for service credit, veteran service credits and what we're using for abatement offset, the overlay. That's it. That's correct. Or essentially, it's the bottom number, net required local tax effort plus
No, I
the
know.
other
No,
two.
I think the thing that I'm still just so confused about is we're not going to know the revenue when we're voting on these things at town meeting.
We will have to estimate the revenue for the year, just like they already did in April. They submitted an estimated revenue to the state. I mean,
But if
they
the
did.
estimation isn't right, and the budget that gets voted in is over, and then we'll
And
have to.
some of this,
do
if we could just
something.
hold, because I actually have this
Okay. Oh,
scenario
oh, great.
in my
Great.
other slide.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
Perfect. I'm ready.
Thanks.
Thanks,
So-
Tim.
No, you're welcome. And so we're good
No,
on the
you're-
warrants. No.
No,
These
no,
are no, and don't. These are excellent questions, believe me.
Yeah.
These are really good.
I think one thing that was really helpful is on your last slide that says any fund balance that's brought forward. I think that's crucial to get clarity
Absolutely.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I got that in writing from Stephen Buckley at NHMA, who's amazing, so.
Okay, let's.
Okay.
Unless there's any questions, let's
Oh, yeah, I guess at this point,
go on to the.
is anyone in the audience, if they're awake, have a question with this specific one? And please, I guess I should have said this from the beginning. If there's something up here or something that I say that you want me to clarify, please just yell out. I mean.
It does not. Yes. No, it goes back,
It-
it just goes back like an appropriation.
Right. It neither hurt, it doesn't hurt or help with the tax cap.
Because you thought that it wasn't going to hit. I was also thinking that.
No, you'd have to cut the total appropriation to do that. Okay. I guess we'll move on to C, which is to review RSA 3218, the limit of appropriations or 10% rule. There was a little bit of questions. There was discussions on the 10% rule in general, and is the ability to override. So I'll review 3218A. God bless you. Okay. So the 10% rule, I don't know why it's going to it's jumping, God bless you. I'm not sure why it's jumping to the last slide when I bring it up, but the 10% rule is actually defined in RSA 3218, it's called the limitation of appropriations. And what I have here is actually from the NHMA Basic Law of Budgeting book that I have, the 2024 edition. So this is verbatim from their document. In towns with an official budget committee, the total amount appropriated by the town meeting, including amounts appropriated in separate and special warrant articles, cannot exceed the total recommended budget by the budget committee by more than 10%. The 10% calculation, unfortunately, it's not as straightforward as just taking what is the budget committee's total recommended budget, because you need to reduce fixed charges. And that's whether it's in the operating budget or if there's any sort of special warrants. But you have to take out fixed charges, and fixed charges include appropriations for principal and interest payments on bonds and notes, as well as mandatory assessments imposed on towns by the county, state, or federal governments. When I asked, they told me that right now, from what they could see, Brentwood only had, for us, it would be the principal and interest payments due on bonds. So in a town with the tax cap, the 10% rule still applies regardless of how the cap affects the proposed budget. And in other words, the legislative body may only appropriate up to 10% more than the total amount recommended by the budget committee. So this budget committee, when we propose our budget, will be within the tax cap that was imposed by the legislative body of 4%. The legislative body at town meeting could add warrants that, or they could vote to increase the appropriation above what we recommend. They could increase it to 5%. They can increase it to 6%.
They can't add warrants, but they can change the amounts.
They could, but someone could though, someone could put in a warrant that we.
Not at town.
No, not at town meeting.
Okay.
I mean,
That's-
but
I
no,
just
what
wanted
I'm
to be
saying is
clear.
there could be I'll word it this way. There was a warrant that was submitted that we don't approve, right? It's not,
Yep.
they could vote for it and increase the total appropriations. The legislative body could vote for that
Yes, we
warrant.
would have to figure out how that would, I think the budget committee and the select board would
Well-
have to decide how you want to do that. Whether it be the select board puts forth a warrant article for an amount and then you cut it down to $1.
But I'll just I have an example.
Okay.
I think it was 2 years ago when I proposed the warrant article for the Brentwood newsletter. It was whatever it was, 17,000, I forget. It was not approved by the select board or the budget committee, but it passed the legislative body. So I'm saying, so that can happen as long as, so they could actually exceed the 4% tax cap if they have a 3/5 majority vote, but they cannot exceed the 10% rule.
That was a citizen's petition, which means it has to be put on the warrant exactly as written. The regular warrant articles that would come from the select board or the chairs of the committee, department heads typically, the select board would approve a number and then it comes to the budget committee. And so we would have to decide, do you approve that number or do you approve the warrant article and change the number to make it under the tax cap? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that does make sense.
It would have to be the latter.
It could be,
Fine.
it could be either.
No, I think you could do either,
You could
but
do it either way. I think just
I know,
figuring out, doing it one way for all of them, I think.
Yeah.
but if somebody says, oh, I want a warrant to purchase something that costs $10,000, right? We know it costs $10,000. If we said, oh, we're going to approve $1,000, I'm not quite sure what that would accomplish, right? Because you can't purchase the thing for, it costs $10,000 by us approving $1,000.
At the meeting, we could amend that number up to 10.
Correct.
Because you can only approve.
Right, and the legislative body could approve it as long as I believe a 3/5 majority, because it would be overriding a 4% tax cap.
It's just a simple majority currently.
I thought the attorney even said at town meeting that it's a 3/5.
This doesn't say 3/5.
This is the,
This? I don't-
The next slide, I think.
yeah, I'll get to the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, I skipped ahead because I was like, yes, it does.
That's all right.
That's a bond article. That's something different.
This is how you override the 10% rule. She jumped to the last slide, which is overriding the tax cap, but that's okay. This is,
no, I was on this slide.
this is,
Wait.
this is,
Still says 3. We should.
that's okay. I'm glad people are excited about this stuff. I'm not the only one.
You know.
So RSA 3218A is the legislative body override of limitation of appropriations or the override of the 10% rule. Again, this came right from the NHMA Basic Law of Budgeting. So this establishes a procedure for a budget committee town like us to vote to override the 10% rule on specific bond issues, bond issue questions. So if a warrant article for a bond is not recommended in its entirety by the budget committee, and that's key, it would be, which makes sense because if we approved it, it would be within the tax cap. So if we couldn't do it, well, anyways, the law says we have to vote no. The governing body may vote to place the article on the warrant with the phrase, quote, passage of this article shall override the 10% limitation imposed on the appropriation due to the non-recommendation of the budget committee. With that additional clause. Now, if the bond article passes by the 3/5 majority vote, it goes. The legislative body has the authority. It's only on bonds, though. It was only on bonds. And then I just added this piece. I don't believe it applies to Brentwood, but RSA 3219 also states that amounts that are in the budget for funding cost items of collective bargaining agreements are exempt from the 10% rule.
It is not currently
Correct.
pertinent, but could be soon. You never know.
Okay. Any questions on the override?
I just wanted to bring up, and I think most everybody here was here a few weeks ago, but this came up because we were worried about the municipal buildings and
Yes.
how that would work with a tax cap and the 10% rule.
And it
So
sounds like it's just outside.
saying it myself.
It's just outside of all of that.
It's, we can't
we'll still have to
recommend
pay
it.
for it.
We still, yeah, right. But it would be something that, if it came to that, and your slides, which I know are coming up about the bond payments that are going to be falling off, which it might not, but now we know the whole picture. So if it came to something that would be over the 10% rule, the budget committee could not recommend it, but the taxpayer, the legislative body, may still vote for it and override the
Absolutely.
10% rule
That's correct.
because it's something that the
That's correct.
Brentwood wants.
Absolutely. And then I guess the only other thing that I would be curious about, because you literally can't approve it, or you, like, because of the,
Right.
is there a way for the budget committee still to weigh in if it wasn't, like, because I think the benefit of the budget committee looking over all of the expenditures is this a reasonable expenditure?
Right.
And so I guess the question would be, is there a way for the budget committee to weigh in on the bond issue as a reasonable expenditure aside
Without
from the
being
tax cap?
recommended. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, and I think, I'm getting ahead now.
That's all right.
But I think this is great also, like for your presentation, Jim, and how this all works together in that the way the bonds that we have are going to expire, I'm curious if this will even be, if we'll even have to figure out a way to recommend or to assess its reasonableness outside of recommendation because of the timing of our current bonds expiration.
Yes, and the 10% I don't think is as much of a concern as the 4%. I'm not sure we can get a bond of the size that we're talking about in the
Well,
4. I'm
right.
not sure. Because
Depends if we lose $250,000
Well,
from our budget.
and
Anyways, let's.
I'll just
move
say
on.
that maybe we should move on, only because there's a lot of variables there, including, how much, what project we're talking about and how much the total project is, what the interest rate would be, and the term of the bond. So there's a lot of question there. But I
absolutely.
agree with
But
you that.
having an understanding of how it
Absolutely.
works
Yeah.
might inform some of those decisions.
Super helpful.
So what I did on the next slide is I just give I went through an example, and I made sure that DRA approved this slide to make sure. It's really simple math, but I just wanted to make sure because that, I was calculating this correctly, but it just shows a simplified, these are not real numbers. So if the budget committee recommends a budget of $4.2 million, and within that budget, there's $200,000 of principal and interest payments, which are considered fixed charges. The base for the 10% rule is $4 million. You take that $200,000 out. So you take 10%, the maximum override on that $4 million is $400,000. That $400,000 override is applied to the budget committee's recommended budget. So at the town meeting, the legislative body could approve appropriations up to, but not exceeding, $4.6 million.
And just so I understand correctly, this 4.2 million, the top budget committee recommended budget,
Yes.
would itself be under 4% or under?
Yes, correct. Again, that's because the legislative body voted that this year that we will have we will not
No, I know.
exceed
I just
4%.
wanted to-
Yes,
I
that's
wanted to understand where the
absolutely
4% came
correct.
in.
Absolutely
It's the
correct.
4.0.
And I believe my last slide talks about, okay, how do we tie this 10% rule with the tax cap? So under RSA 32.5B, paragraph 3, the legislative body may override the cap by the usual procedures. Now, in parentheses, that is not, where it says 3/5 majority, that is not in the current law. So everything else in that sentence, applicable to the annual meetings, legislative body, the provisions of this section shall not limit the legislative body authority to increase or decrease.
It's just going to sleep.
Me?
Get up again.
Okay.
No, it's me.
So again, the tax cap was never meant to limit the legislative body's authority at all. So they can increase or decrease any, to go. But the 3/5 majority that I put there, because the law currently says the usual procedure applicable, right? I'm pretty sure that one of the residents asked this question at town meeting to our attorney, and she said it was 3/5 majority. Now, but I'll get a firm answer. If I finish this slide, and we can come back to that if we
Okay.
still have a question. So the legislative body can override the 4% tax cap at town meeting.
What? You
But-
know what this is.
But the approved appropriations must comply with RSA 3218, the 10% rule. A 3/5 majority of the legislative body may approve a bond that was not recommended by the Budget Committee, which exceeds both the tax cap and the 10% rule per 32.5B3 and 3218A. Does that make sense? Okay. As Letty mentioned, interesting enough, that there is currently proposed legislation to, and actually the reason why I believe they're doing this is because 32.5B3 as currently written is kind of vague by saying by the usual procedures applicable to annual meetings. The current law basically replaces the language in 32.5B with 3/5 majority ballot vote. And if you look at the current legislation, HB 200, I don't have the whole thing here, but it talks about 3/5 majority. It talks about it needs to be a ballot vote, not raising of hands thing, and the poll has to be open for 1 hour, all that.
That's fine. That's just not the usual procedure. The usual procedure is you raise your hand, it's a simple majority.
Correct.
So-
But
So currently, it's the top one without the 3/5?
currently, it says by the usual procedures applicable to annual meetings of the legislative body. And Letty, I'm almost positive, I was sitting in the second row, almost behind our attorney, and one of the residents specifically asked the question about overriding the tax cap, and she said 3/5 majority.
Overriding or overturning?
I think it might have been overturning
Okay.
from my memory.
Okay,
I believe it was
Just
over.
because,
Well-
because it's always a
We-
simple
we could
majority,
get-
which is why the 3/5 or 2/3 one's
Right.
always so no.
and we could get a definite answer on that. I know HB 200 specifically says 3/5 majority.
Yes, which is why it's concerning, because that was not in place
Okay.
when the townspeople voted, if they thought it was a simple majority, when they voted for it, but it's a 3/5 ballot vote, that changes the dynamic. a little
Again,
bit.
it took a 3/5 majority to put the tax cap in place, so I'm not sure why you would think it wouldn't be a 3/5 to override it, but I don't
That
know.
was overturning, not overriding it. So like if the townspeople were to override it as a one-time thing, it was previously a simple majority.
No.
But to just overturn it and say, we're done, we don't have a tax cap anymore was.
Why don't we have
$3.50.
our lawyer just give us an interpretation of that? Because I don't know if this law is gonna pass. I don't know if it got through the House yet, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know for sure. I would imagine that there are people who would feel comfortable maybe not going to every single town meeting with the understanding that the cap is in place. So even if we override it by the usual procedures, which is just a simple majority, there's still a hard limit on how much their taxes could possibly go up, which is the 4 plus the 10.
no, it's the 10. It doesn't add. The 4 is within the 10.
No.
The hard cap
above the
is
10.
the hard cap is the 10% rule.
I know, but the
I don't know.
go back one. Yeah, so you said that the 4 is in the 4.2 in this one? And the 10 is on top of that?
in this example, the budget committee recommends 4.2 million. Let's just hypothetically say, yes, that's that was the max we could go, 4%, 4.2 million.
So then we can go 10% on top of that.
Correct.
Okay, so that's what I was saying, so.
Actually, it doesn't matter. If we propose a budget that is flat, zero increase, flat.
Yeah.
If this 4.2 was flat, has nothing to do with the tax cap, the limit is still $4.6 million.
No, I understand. No, it's not.
Yes, it is. The 10% rule has like I said, if you look,
10% is based off the current year's recommended budget.
That's
4% is based
Less.
off prior years.
But that's what I'm saying, is
Tax
that if
effort.
somebody, let's say somebody was like, do I take the day off of work to go to town meeting? I don't know, let's look at what last year's budget was. The absolute maximum that they could have to pay is 4% of last year's budget plus 10% on top of that.
I guess.
Unless
Unless
there's
there's
bonds.
Less bonds.
Well, but you know what I mean?
No,
So like that person could decide, like, you know what? I feel okay about that. Or not.
the maximum that could be done, and let's take out the bond example, right?
Sure.
The maximum that could be done is 10% over whatever the budget committee recommends.
Yes, and the maximum the budget committee could recommend is 4% over last year's budget.
That's correct.
But you would know, like,
I was
if
that
somebody,
person would have that information.
Yes.
though.
current year
And
budget.
they could, looking at these numbers, be like, you know what? I'm okay if they go up to $400,000 more than the number that I see here.
Right.
And then they might not come to the meeting because
That's
True.
true.
they're like, oh, okay.
I just want to make sure we're clear. It's really has not much to do with the 4% tax cap. It's whatever our recommended budget's going to be
Right,
listed
here.
in the town, in
Right.
the town report. And
Absolutely.
they could say, you can't go 10% over that. Of course, they have to subtract the fixed charges, but
The only reason the tax cap comes into it is that up until this year, the budget committee wasn't limited in what it could recommend.
Right.
So,
I would say that is correct.
But they would know that, just hypothetically, they would know that number before they took the day off. But yes.
right, and the tax, well, we can get into, at some point, do we talk about the actual implications? I lost track of the presentations.
So this is all I had on the 10% rule. Unless I'm
Okay.
good.
Yeah, I think it's helpful, especially in terms of the bond.
Yeah.
What was the last thing? The next one I'm doing is the budget estimated tax impact.
So just really quickly, I ran these numbers and for the last 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, and we never would have hit the 10% cap in the last 6 years. So,
Well, this 10%
No.
was
Okay.
here.
There's no 10% cap. I'm confused.
yeah, there is. You can't add
No,
more than
the
10%.
10% rule means the legislative body goes more than 10% over what the budget committee recommended.
They can't.
Well, you just said that we never violated the 10.
Right, we didn't. because
I don't know of a year.
If we had had this in place any of the years that Letty's talking about, we would not have hit the 10% rule.
What I'm saying, I'm going to say this
what I'm
again,
hearing.
Jim. Okay, I took the budgets that we had in all of these years. I didn't realize about adding the stuff back in, so it's actually a lower number. I did the 4%, and then I did a possible how much they could have added at town meeting, which would have been a maximum number of 10%, and then I compared it to the actual amount that we approved at town meeting. And all of those times, what we approved at town meeting could have been approved under this scheme. So that feels pertinent because
How many of those years did we violate the 4% rule? Tax cap.
I have no idea because no one was limited by the 4% rule.
Okay, just was asking. Because you looked at 4% plus 10, I think you said.
Right, because we could have gone over 4% every single one of those years.
We, the legislative body, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the legislative body in all of these years voted to approve all of these expenditures. Right?
Yep.
So, because I was curious to know if this would have actually limited any of the things that we'd done in the past, and the answer is it would not have.
The 10% rule, you mean? What
None of
limited?
this would have limited.
Well, we didn't have a tax cap, right? So the 4%
Tax
had
cap does
nothing.
not limit what the legislative body wants to pay for.
That is,
The
that's
tax
correct.
cap does not
That
limit.
is
And that's what
correct.
I'm saying. So with the tax cap, over the last 6 years, the legislative body could still have approved all of the expenditures that they had.
I totally agree.
Great. Okay. That,
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I don't ever
did.
recall a year
they did. I mean, this is the actual budgets that were approved by the legislative
where,
body. So
where
they
the
did approve.
legislative body approved a budget that was higher than what the select board and the budget committee approved. I don't know. I've only been here 7 years. So I think it's
Hold on.
hypothetically
Hold
this
on.
could
Hold
work,
on.
but
Nope.
I
Time out.
am not aware of a year
out.
where the legislative body approved a budget that was higher, because this is what we're talking about, higher than what the budget committee recommended.
That is not true. There have been years when the people of town meeting have raised the operating budget for specific purposes. So like that was higher than the number that the,
And thanks to New Hampshire that they're allowed to do that. It's awesome. It's how it should be.
yes, but I guess, okay. Yep,
Yeah.
We good on 10% rule?
sure.
Next is, we talked about the estimated tax impact for 2025. So I wanted to just share a little more details on that. Oop, wrong one. Tax impact. Again, I don't know. Let's go. Okay. So basically, all this slide shows is what we saw at the budget hearing on February 10th, 2025. And I highlighted, the drivers that were, the estimates that were given, and what the total tax impact would be, 7.1% increase or $714 on a $400,000 property. I didn't make a slide because my wife told me I have way too many slides, but I did, I went by what we voted at, because the appropriations went down slightly, the operating budget went down, as well as some of the warrants got cut. And if you take those out, then basically this slide becomes 6.2% increase or $627 on a $400,000 house. But my focus on really is, as I talked about last time, is the two important drivers of revenue estimate as well as fund balance to reduce taxes. So what I'm doing here on the second slide, and I know there's a lot of numbers there, but again, we're budget committee, and if anybody hasn't seen or has never played with this playground file that Letty was gracious enough to share with me and last year during the budget season, it's pretty powerful in that you can basically modify the drivers and it will automatically calculate the tax rate for you, the tax rate impact. So it's really a powerful tool. So what I did is I basically took all the drivers exactly the same. I updated the revenue line to be a 5% growth instead of what was used was 10 in February. And I did that because the average over the last 5 years has been about 5.9%. I was being conservative. I went with 5. I put $1 on fund balance to offset taxes. And I have details on this later, but I put in there that I'm just trying to retain the minimum 5% per hour. That's what NHDRA recommends as a minimum, as well as our own local fund balance policy says we shall be between 5 and 17%. If I do that, if I just change those two things, the projected town tax rate jumps to $6.32, or up $1.07, or that 7% changes to 12% increase. And the overall projected tax increase on a $400,000 home goes from that $700 to $1,207. Now again, everything else in all these numbers are exactly the same between what we heard at the budget hearing and what I'm showing here. I changed two things. One, the revenue from 10 growth to 5% growth. And then obviously the big impact is taking $1.35 million of fund balance to offset taxes. And basically now it's being replaced in this slide with, you'll see that there's $335,611 on that line called voted surplus. That's because of the warrants. We have to do that. That's the legislative body has already done that. And then I put $1 on the fund balance line, and I'll show you why in one of the next slides. So again, this is showing $1,207 or 12% projected increase. This next slide, I'll call this the historic method of estimating tax impact. I don't really know how long this has been done, but I know for the
The way
last,
the NHMA recommend, well, not this way.
right.
The way New Hampshire Municipal has always recommended, which is the way that it's always been done up until last year, is just taking the difference, like the flat difference from last year to this year.
Right.
And dividing it by the total valuation, then multiplying times 400
Correct.
for the.
Which is essentially kind of what this does, really, right? Because the valuation staying flat, basically you leave everything flat. It says revenue flat. Basically, the fund balance offset, you leave it, they used to leave it flat. That's a little scary because we know we got burnt with that, but everything stays flat, including valuations. You don't say, hey, we've been averaging 2% a year increase. You just leave everything flat. But this is how it has historically been done. If you do it that way, well, again, the projected town tax rate is $5.96. And, again, it's because that the valuations are staying flat. So a lot of the rates are going to change, go up for all of them, right? Not just town, for school, for everybody. But the important numbers are the projected overall tax rate increase, where we had said 7 is now, it would have been 12.3%. And the projected tax increase on a $400,000 home is $1,236. And again, this is compared to what we shared in February with the public as 7% and $700.
Just really quickly,
Yep.
the method that I was just talking about that historically been done, which is the total difference divided by the total valuation, gives a different number than this. And so it might be worth also presenting that number.
Yeah, if you can get me that.
Yeah, I could tell it to you right now.
Sure.
Just because, especially, well, I have the one that's just for the town warrants, because that's the one that we actually kind of have control over at town meeting.
Okay, so this is kind of what is actually in the town report right now from what we put together on that little ad hoc committee where you have the how many cents that.
Yes, I mean, I think I sent this to you last week, or I've lost track of the things I've sent over, but when you were talking about doing this, I was like, oh, I had already done that. I know I handed it out to the select board at our last meeting. So for example, the difference between what was appropriated last year to what was appropriated this year for just the town budget and warrants was $181,000, which is a 2.7% increase over last year, which is 24 cents per thousand, which on a $400,000 property is $95.62. So that's just the town portion. And so I think this is all accurate and great, but we don't really have a ton of other pieces.
Well, at the budget hearing, the number that the residents are probably most interested in is their total tax bill, right?
But at the town meeting, we can't control the total tax bill. We can only control the.
Oh, no, that's true. I agree with that, but there's other meetings you can go to for Swayze and for co-op. All I'm saying is we presented a number. The residents are definitely, I know I am interested in the total tax bill, the total tax increase. Yeah, there's definitely 4 pieces to it, but, right.
Right, but the town is not the big piece. I guess is the
I-
thing that always.
And I didn't say it was the
Oh,
big
I-
piece. I'm just
I
saying,
know.
I guess I'll end this because I do have more to go on, because I wanted to, I just think we should probably maybe talk about this again in the future. I really feel strongly that maybe around July sometime, we should, with the select board, come up with a revised number that we're going to have the residents understand what the tax impact is going to be. Because in February, they were told 7% and $700, and I don't think it's going to be that. I think it's going to be higher. And I think when I get to the next slide, you're going to see why, because it has to do with the unreserved fund balance. The estimate of using $1.35 million, which is a big number, I don't believe we're going to be able to do that. And the reason why is that in 2024, we had $977,530 in retained fund balance, unreserved fund balance. That's what we had total.
Sorry, say that again. Where, or, you need like a laser.
You know, I don't know if, honestly, I don't think laser pointers work on a TV. I think I
They
tried
don't.
this.
I bought one.
I'm
But
not
could
sure how I can do
Could you
it.
put your, like, just tell me where,
Right here.
Cursor? Yeah, we can't see it.
Well,
anyway.
mouse isn't even showing.
Oh, probably because you're in presentation mode. Anyway, say what you said again and I will.
Okay, the 2024 total retained fund balance, $977,530. It's right on the tax report that we get from the state, right? The only, assuming we don't have any revenue surplus, I actually asked the town administrator last week. The number that we went to the state with was $2,100,646. So obviously, if you have surpluses at the end of the year that you actually are higher than that, those additional revenues get put into the unreserved fund balance. It adds to that. But at this point, I asked her, she's not 100% sure. They don't have the number finalized for the end of the year, but didn't think we were going to have surplus or enough surplus that would make any difference to what this calculation is.
So, I guess the only thing I'll mention is we could. So like, I know this year we're gonna have additional revenue because we sold a town-owned property.
But this is,
2025.
but that's,
Right, but there could be stuff like that in 2024 that I just don't know about. Because that
yeah.
wouldn't have been expected.
I was there last week. Yeah, if we have some, it helps us, no doubt, right? The total appropriations with warrants, I have the numbers there, the actual expenditures. I have it through February because that was the last number I had.
Wait, that number's not, total appropriation is 7.
This was for last year, buddy. Remember, this is just looking at 2024 because if you look at the unreserved fund balance at the end of the year,
Yep.
once we took out the offset to taxes, what we were left with $977,530. What I'm trying to show is how much do we have right now? And I could not get that exact number from anyone here. They didn't.
That's because nobody's doing the fighting.
Correct. However, I think the best way to estimate this, and I reviewed this with the town administrator, is revenue surplus would increase the amount, but she didn't think we would have any or a lot. Obviously, for last year, you would subtract expenditures from appropriations. So any unexpended balance of appropriations, and it's roughly was $600,000 as of February 14th. I asked her, she said that's probably roughly right. So you basically add that 600,000 or whatever, 594,696 to last year's 977,530. Our current fund balance is $1.57 million. The 2025 general fund operating expenses are $24 million. And that's important because that's used as the denominator when you calculate the percent fund balance retained, okay? So remember, my estimate, the best estimate I can come up with right now, because we don't have accurate numbers for last year, is that we have $1.57 million in fund balance. At town meeting, the legislative body approved using $335,610. If you take that out of the 1.57, it leaves us $1.237 million or 5.1%. Remember, the minimum, the NHDRA recommends between 5 and 17%. Our own fund balance policy in the town states that we will have between 5 and 17%. So back to when we estimated using 1.35 million, if you look in the red box below that, if you did use $1.35 million, that would leave $222,000 or 0.9% retained fund balance, which is a little bit less than 5%. And if we used what we did last year, or $870,064, that would leave us with $702,000 or 2.9%, again, below the 5% minimum.
The numbers in the red box, shouldn't we also take out the stuff that we voted to pay for warrant articles out of unreserved fund balance?
Well,
Because that wouldn't be available anymore.
if you look in the very first green box, it says 335610.
Yep.
That's the example of what we use. So you take, that's
Yep.
the example
The
of
second green box,
what,
see how the second green box and the 222,
sure.
those don't add up to 1.236.
Well, all I'm saying is in the example that was given at the public hearing, assume that it's both surplus and what the select board does to offset taxes, $1.35 million. Yeah, you're correct.
Okay.
The problem is you can't do both. You can't do 1.35 million plus 335,000 because you
No, can't.
exceed
That's
the total
why I was
amount.
confused.
No, that's just showing based on the estimate that was given. Again, this is why I think this is the number one reason why I feel strongly that we need to go to the voters is that we are not going to have $1.35 million to offset taxes this year.
I would just like to point out that we actually have no idea what's going to happen in the fall because we're reevaluating everyone this year.
Well, I hate to say this, but the reevaluation doesn't have anything to do with the fund balance offset.
Not the fund balance offset, but it does have to do with what your personal taxes at your house might do.
Okay. If we want to have, how about this? If we want to have a discussion on reevaluation and its impact on taxes on individuals' home, I say we do this in the future. I'll take another action item because it's complicated and I really don't see how it ties into this fund balance thing
It does
here.
not tie into the.
And it
fund
doesn't tie into
if your
it
goal-
doesn't tie into I don't believe the increase is going to be 7%. I think it's going to be 11 or 12%. And reevaluation, no, the reevaluation, no, that's not true. The reevaluation,
Town portion. So this is just about the town portion, right?
no, ma'am. Oh,
Yes,
fund
this is
balance
just
only
about
has
the
to do
town.
with town, absolutely.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So this is fund balance for town portion. However, the 5% is retained fund balance is based on general fund,
Which is all. of
town, county, and total school.
Correct.
And so is there not a time where, like, the school has a balance that they often return? Correct?
That comes off before they ask for money, basically.
So they don't retain a fund balance that we would
They do
add
not
to
retain a
get
fund
to
balance.
5%.
And one of the main reasons they don't retain a fund balance is because the way their fiscal year works. So,
is so
get
right.
ready.
Well, I just wanted to know if it was yes or no, because
The answer is no.
it seems.
So the way the school works
Ooh.
in a very short version is their budget season goes from July 1st to June 30th.
Yeah.
And we vote in March. So they're done with their budget before they start the new one. The town operates on a hope and a wing and a prayer for the
Right.
first 3 months of the
Right.
year because we're a fiscal year.
Yeah, and yeah, we had talked about potentially.
might be worth-
moving. I just think it seems a little, and maybe I need to do my own research on why we would be doing 5% on the 24 million. Do you have any insight?
I believe it just goes by the total operating like they say you should have 2 months of operating expenses in the fund. GFOA as well as DRA, which equates to 5 to 17. Well, actually, GFOA says 5 to 15%. DRA in New Hampshire says 5 to 17. The reason why they have the higher, they want the average to be higher, is because New Hampshire is so heavily reliant on property taxes.
Right, okay.
So that's why they, and again, this is because, right, if things happen, drastic things happen, you can, under emergency acts, you can utilize these funds to keep things going, you know?
I mean, if drastic things happen, we can just have a special town meeting and ask for more
Right,
money. too.
right, correct. But that's, but it is, the rules are based on the general fund operating expenses, the total. You're correct. It includes county, it excludes everything.
I wonder if it would be worth considering proportionally how much each of those
Right.
contributes and figuring out if we do need as much as they recommend.
Well, I had shared with you, I personally, if you look at it, I agree. I don't think we need to have in the middle. I think 8% would be definitely adequate to, for what, is, you know, given the size of our town, given the likelihood of us having a scenario where we run into a real significant shortfall of property taxes being paid, I would think, I saw other communities as well had used 8% as a target. And I think that I had shared that actually with you as on a draft fund balance policy.
I think the challenge that we're gonna have here in Brentwood is that a lot of the towns that use that number are already closer to that number. Like that has been the policy for a long time.
which is
So
wh-
they've been hovering around that for
Which
years.
is why I think what I put in there is that there needs to be like a 5-year plan of how we get from, let's just say if we just this year keep it at 5, how do we get from 5 to 8? I agree. I think you need like a 5-year plan because, I mean, there's ways of doing it, and we don't, again, I don't want to get off track here, but there's ways of estimating revenues and appropriations, as well as, you know, every year you're going to have some unexpended appropriations usually, and leaving it in there instead of utilizing it. I also think it means at town meeting next year, we as a committee should be very prepared to let the legislative body know how much fund reserve we have, and if they decide to try to use it for a warrant, how much it's going to eat up and how much we will have left. So they will know if they're pushing us below the level, you know? I think that behooves us to be prepared for that this year.
But if they wanna do that in order to lower their taxes, because that would be the only benefit, it wouldn't affect the tax cap.
That is
just affect-
correct.
It would just lower the
Totally
tax
correct.
rate.
Totally correct. I'm just saying, no, they could do it, but I think we should make them aware that, okay.
What it means.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll just say one last thing, unless there's other questions. You mentioned about valuation, but honestly, the impact of 12% that I have here doesn't change if that valuation is different, because all that happens is if the valuations go up 30% in the town because of the reval, the tax rate will come down 30%, but the average homeowner's home will go up 30%. So their tax bill stays exactly the same, and these numbers pretty much will be exactly the same.
For most
So-
people, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, listen, and again, like I said,
Because you're-
we,
it might-
I'll take this as a future item.
third of
Yeah.
people
She
don't
is right.
change, a third of
1/3,
people go up, a third of
and
people go
I
down.
will,
Yeah.
if we want to do this, I'll, you know,
And
I'll,
just you might have some people in that third that went up that said, hey, you told me all these
There-
things. My taxes.
they're gonna,
But then you built an addition, and so your house is
Exactly.
way more.
So that's what most,
There-
and I think most people would know that, but I
Oh.
just,
There-
I don't.
no, I think it's very difficult.
But you're gonna get
When-
a couple people if we say, hey, this is what to expect, and then they get the thing that they don't expect.
If it wasn't a reevaluation year, I believe what Letty's trying to say, and I think this is exactly right. When we tell people that the average is gonna be 7% or it's gonna be 12%, it is, everybody's taxes will be that percentage unless, like you
Yes,
said,
I think the
you
issue is-
did a project.
Yeah.
This year, it's not, we can say as an average, we know what the increase will be as an average. And if your property goes up, what the average property in Brentwood goes up, what we're telling you is true. But I can't tell Letty what hers will be, or Jim, or
Mine-
Michelle. Like, we won't know because, you know, if I moved into one of these $1 million houses last year, which I didn't, guess what? My taxes are going down because when they do the reeval, my property's not going to change much. But the tax rate's going to come down 30%, right? You know what I'm
I
saying?
understand that.
And then the poor guy who lives around the
That's the
corner.
problem is that we understand.
We understand that.
I know, and which is why, honestly,
When we present
maybe we
it,
should,
need to be
maybe
a
we
little
should do this as we get closer, as, you know, when they start doing people, I don't know if they've started going around yet doing it, but, you know, I'll try to put together a little slide deck, and maybe it'd be really good to share with the public how it works
Yes.
and how it,
And
you know,
that's,
can
and I think
impact
we
each
can
person.
probably revisit this point in a few minutes
Cool.
when I see,
Yeah, because I'm done with this.
number 7 of this meeting
Wait,
agenda.
I lost my agenda.
So,
My agenda somewhere.
yeah, it looks like you still had part E, 6E left.
Yeah, and I promise this is the shortest one.
If I can just interject, we usually try to keep these meetings to 2 hours,
Okay.
which is.
Do you want me to skip this next one then?
Yeah, but we're not done.
Do you want me to skip it?
Is it okay if we review the bond thing at the next meeting? Is everybody okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
And just go on to the,
You can say.
Oh,
if
you're right,
business.
you're right, the subcommittees.
I would like,
I think the subcommittees are,
more important.
yeah, more
Right now.
time critical, and the bonds will be the bonds.
The bonds will
next
be the
time.
bonds next.
Okay, fine.
We can still talk about.
And we don't need
this
to vote this,
one-on-one.
right? We don't need to vote this. You okay
No,
with?
yeah.
Yeah, because
totally.
I agree. I think
I-
I've gone on
Into the
enough.
subcommittee.
Again,
Yeah.
I apologize. I hope, like I said,
No,
I
it's-
know I put a lot of slides, but I just wanted to share as much info as I could.
I mean, the only reason I wanted to get to the bond stuff is because I think it's good news.
Sure.
Well, then we can
So
have good
maybe-
news for next
we
time. We'll
Yeah, or,
start
or
off on
we,
a break.
or we roll through these committee things in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
next
that's
9
true.
minutes.
All right.
That's true.
So
Get to the-
in the next
That's
8
true. I
minutes,
told Adam I'd be home for bedtime at 8, so.
no, that's, I
That's
agree.
not too bad.
I know.
Sure, golden.
So under new business, subcommittees, I know maybe we discussed it a little bit last time, but based on the presentation we heard tonight, as well as when I first got elected, I mean, I think one of the subcommittees that I would recommend that we set up is a health insurance subcommittee, or insurance in general, just looking at insurance. Obviously, I think the health insurance is the most important part.
Benefits and
Even if this wasn't going on at the State House, I just say that it's one of those things where I think I've mentioned this to a couple of you, that the tail wagging the dog thing, you know, like it's one of those things where we definitely want to, as a body, have some understanding of and some control of, especially this year when we're going to be looking at strategically planning and prioritizing to meet a tax cap. We're going to have to look at healthcare costs in general and what we're doing in town. And I think I would like to recommend that we vote to have a subcommittee set up that would have 2 of us who would lead the way to kind of go do all the digging, pull in experts, probably link up, maybe if Letty thinks this is a good idea, that you could get a couple of the select board members to be part of this as well. But just to be able to come back to this group and report on the insurance costs in the town, projections, suggestions, like I think you had said about, does it make sense to look at going private? Well, I think that is something that I would definitely want to look at on this subcommittee. So anyways, but I think in order to have a subcommittee, we need to have a motion and a vote.
No, we don't. You can just set up any
I can
subcommittee.
just set it up? Okay.
Take charge.
good.
No, I thought,
Oh, the
honestly,
power.
but I thought when I read it that I got to pick who the members were, but that we had to vote for the subcommittee, but you know better than I do on this. So I am going to set up this subcommittee, and this will be one of those times where I really feel I want to be on this subcommittee, and then I would ask if there's a volunteer who would like to be another member with me on that subcommittee. Well, I think you're a select board person, so I'm not sure I can pick you. I think you should be, and maybe someone else from the select board. It's something we should work together. But I would like to
You think
have.
I should be?
Well, no, I thought you were raising your hand.
No, I'm literally saying no, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. First I saw the finger when my glasses
Nope,
were this
not it.
way, so
Not me.
I wasn't sure what I had said, but, okay, so I would like to have a volunteer from our committee. Anyone? Michelle? Okay, so we're going to establish an insurance subcommittee of myself and Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
And I'd like to have ask Ched Miller to be a part of that. He was here
Sure.
at last month's meeting and I
Sure.
volunteered to do that.
I
Absolutely.
want to see if anyone else in the public might have.
I actually,
Yeah.
my neighbor across the street, he's an insurance broker. And I did speak to him briefly about this, and he said he absolutely would be willing to run scenarios for us if we wanted to look at private sector, like, so.
Sure, just remember that there are people that don't pay attention to any of these meetings. So
It's
if we
okay.
put out a wider call, we might get
Yeah, sure.
other people
Sure.
we don't even know about.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to take advantage of, you know, the people who live here and pay taxes
So-
here, that they might be able to do a few things to lower their own tax bill. And I'm sure there's probably a few people who'd be interested in either, if not serving
So
on
what
it,
we'll do is we'll
for it.
post something looking for residents who are interested in coming to speak and maybe be, if they really want to join and be a part of it. That's a great idea. Thanks, Letty.
Or it could just be a rolling, if they hear about it, they can join.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like you could pull in experts when needed, you know? Yeah, that's a really good idea. The other one I was thinking of is trash/waste disposal and recycle. I know that has also come up. And given, you know, the cost of trash, cost of recycling, again, one of those things where let's make sure we have an understanding and some control of that, as well as I think there are some other options that could be looked at. But
I
if,
guess just for both of these, you understand that the subcommittee that you're forming doesn't actually have any power, right?
the only power I see either of these committees having is to come back to the budget committee to give them information so that when we go to set the budget, we absolutely can say how much we want to grow lines in the budget, right? Like we can say for trash, we want to increase this, or for insurance, we want to increase that. I believe that's the budget committee's purview.
I think my concern with the trash one is we're locked into that our contract, are we not?
See, that's why I think we need a subcommittee, because I've heard we're not.
But I'm not sure
And-
I don't know if budget committee is the right place to form that.
Well, all I'm saying is that if we want to try to control, like, again, about prioritizing and strategically planning growth within a 4% tax cap window, if somebody can figure out ways of improving the costs on recycle or trash, I think the budget committee can then recommend amounts in the budget.
You just have to bring your trash to the dump like a regular
Well,
person.
I don't know, maybe.
Right.
That-
I mean, if
All I'm saying is, Letty, if hypothetically, if the budget showed $100,000, if somebody on the subcommittee figured out a way, hey, we could cut it in half, this budget committee could next year say, you're going to get $50,000 for trash, and then it gets done, right? Like, I mean,
No,
no?
it doesn't get done. And I guess that's the part that I feel like is important to point out.
Okay.
I think these would just be information gathering committees, and then obviously we don't have the authority to establish, establish a trash contract or anything that would go before the select
No,
board, but if no one else is gathering this information and we're willing to gather this information, then let's do that.
Yes, I guess I'm saying I would hope that you would present your suggestion for reduction to the select board before budget.
I think I know on the insurance one, I'm going to go to Paul and ask if there are select board members who would like to be part of it. I think it should be a joint committee. I do believe that, and I think trash should be the same way.
Okay, yeah, I'm not. I'm
And
just
it's
saying-
more about, I agree, of getting information and understanding the cost drivers and are there
Yes,
ways to do
but
it
again,
better.
just to be clear, even if this committee decides, based on that information, that you're gonna cut the trash line or cut the insurance line, that doesn't actually translate to a reduction in expenses for the town or the
That's
budget.
understood.
Okay,
It's not just a matter of cutting a line, it's changing
yes.
the service. Yes,
Yes.
it's a bigger.
Okay.
Absolutely,
fix.
yeah, we
But
don't,
we can't
We-
do anything, or we can't get new services without having all of the information, and
Understand.
sometimes it's
Right.
hard to
Oh, I
have
know.
everyone have.
That's
yeah,
why
have
I'm
So-
everyone
not.
do that. Yes.
So again, this would be up to the board then, if they want to have a subcommittee to look at waste disposal and recycle. I would need probably 2 volunteers to kind of lead that.
I know in the past, this is something I've looked into, feel pretty strongly about. So I'm willing to volunteer. Trash and waste disposal is almost 10% of our appropriations. So I think it's a really big lever that we have. And there are lots of examples of other towns, places doing different things that could be helpful for our town to look into.
Send you
Thanks, Lenny.
about recycling.
I love that.
Thank you so much.
Everybody
for
else watch
volunteering.
the Buy Now Netflix special, please.
The what?
There's a Netflix special called Buy Now. It's very, I mean, besides everything else that was out there, it's also very informative about where your recycling actually goes.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's good.
Is there anyone, there's only 3 of us. Is there anyone who wants to be with Gabby on this subcommittee?
I know you already volunteered.
How many hands do I have to raise
No.
one night? Actually, I would have an interest in that.
You've talked about it.
I've talked about it for a long time, so.
Thank you,
And
Michelle.
I'm about to propose a third subcommittee that I know I've talked to Jim about, which is communications. Communicate, because I think we talk about a lot of things here. These meetings are not short. The presentations are also not short. I think a lot of people don't always have the time or capacity to go through and like really get the gist of everything that we talk to. And I know this is what I spoke with Jim about before even our first meeting. You know, we do these great walkthroughs with all of the department heads, and we hear, you know, here's where we're planning this many years down the line for, you know, this different thing. Or I think specifically the rec one for me was really informative, where it's like, okay, we put in the pickleball courts because they'll bring in revenue rather than redoing the soccer fields first, because they're already bringing in revenue. And this way, whatever, you know, whenever the soccer fields need to get the irrigation and sprinkler system put in, you know, there'll be another revenue driver. So I think having a committee where we take what we hear, kind of make a TLDR, then communicate that back out to the public.
For anyone who doesn't know, TLDR means too long, didn't read. I've been asked that before.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I
Thank you.
would volunteer to be on a communications subcommittee, because I think we have a lot of great, and especially when we're as we continue to try to like gather information, I think getting this information back out to people in a digestible way, where it's not just, well, I heard this from my neighbor and now I'm mad, could be very beneficial.
I'm curious if, I know there are other communication subcommittee, they've disappeared, they're dissolved. Okay. I was just curious if that would be another joint effort.
We tried.
I
I gave
think
up.
It could
You
be
did a
great
really
joint
good
effort,
job.
but
What about the ad hoc? That was really good.
It
Is
was
that
so
just a
good.
one-time thing, or is that
I don't know.
over?
That was because that was because nobody else was doing anything.
I know, and it was so good.
If the budget committee is going to do something, the budget committee is welcome to. I have things you could drop numbers into if that would be helpful, but
Yeah, I think, Kat, I think that's a really, really good idea.
yeah,
I do.
that's my thought for the
And-
subcommittee. If you want to make it a subcommittee, because I think that's your power.
Yeah, I think it should be.
if
Yeah,
anyone else wants to
especially
do it.
because I think now it will be official. The ad hoc did such good work, but I'm not sure how that works as an ad hoc. Like, did that just dissolve, or maybe we can
Yeah.
we can kind of pull those folks in because they were really good. It
Yeah.
went really well. I think what they put together with Letty and Michelle, like it was
so
really
what
good.
that was is last year, I thought the budget committee should present basically what the ad hoc committee ended up presenting, and the budget committee wasn't quite ready because it was a new concept. And so I just
Okay.
decided to do it anyway. But
Okay.
I think it would be great for it to be
I do
something
too.
official
Yeah,
something.
I didn't even know about this.
That's
So
that's communication.
I will just say this, I think it's great.
But,
And
Yeah.
I'm, thank you
So
for
I will
stepping up to
volunteer
do
for
it.
the committee that I just
And
I will volunteer to help you as long as I don't have to generate information, but I can help you format
Okay.
it.
thank you.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
I will do.
Thank you so much. That's excellent. So I have 3. Insurance, trash.
Sorry,
For
you can't
all
be
of-
on that, because then there'd be 3 of us. Oh, you need for that.
For all of those, can we put out, I'm sure there's a template that we have somewhere for any other volunteers who may be interested from the community. Jan?
Right.
Can you come?
Yeah.
You have to come to a microphone so that the recording can hear you. Thank you, Becky.
Becky Dunham, former member of the Communications Committee. I remember one of the issues with having the official Communications Committee was the necessity to be aware of quorums if there were members and the required notations and all the paperwork that went with that.
Mhm.
So when you get to a point where you're inviting the public to come in and you're designating 3 other people to be on your committee, you're going to have 5 or 6 people. It's a quorum. You have to publish the meetings. You have to publish the notes. It becomes much more complicated and work-related. As I recall, that group wanted to step back and be used on an informal basis if an issue came up. That was my understanding when we disbanded. But
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference between somebody joining a committee, subcommittee, and kind of being a major cog is different from like, oh, we need someone who's got a graphic design background to do this one quick thing.
right.
So I think that if we are just looking for specific skills at different times, then that wouldn't necessarily need to.
So it's not an
But-
official subcommittee, so to speak, because I have
They
a
wouldn't be
subcommittee.
members of the subcommittee. They would
No.
just be helpers.
I think Becky's point is if we set up these committees, then we have to
Report on them.
have minutes and things like
Yeah.
that. And we did not do that on the ad hoc committee.
No, because I literally just made it up.
Okay, so
was
it's
just a
should,
group of
I
people
mean,
that
I
happened to
think,
be
but
there.
if I'm
Because I have a
understanding you,
team.
should we set up something that's not a committee?
Well,
Yes,
So that we're not
and
having.
like
to-
I
a
was,
work group.
be
If
so
you called it
structured.
a work group,
Yeah,
then I think you get away with the quorum issue. I have a subcommittee for conservation. We do public, non-public minutes.
Posting
We have
agendas, all that,
posting the meetings, and it's very different than having
Working
a
group.
work group that's more informal.
so if there are 2 of us, like on this, Michelle and I,
fine.
we're fine, right?
I
And
don't
if
know
we
if you
went
should
to
have to
talk,
post it.
we went and we spoke with a person who's like Chad about, so now he's a resident speaking to us by giving us information. That's not
And then you'd report
technically
it at your
considered. But
budget committee.
again,
Right.
because my
But
goal
just
was
be
at the
aware of
end.
the
Oh,
complication.
absolutely. That's why for sure I was saying we don't want to have more than 2 because we don't want to complicate it and make something where we have to.
be 4 for it to be a quorum of this board. So as long as it's 3 people from here or less.
Okay, thank you.
Right, right.
Okay, so just to be aware.
No, Becky, thank you so much. That's really, yeah, it's very important.
Good to think about.
That's very important. Yeah, because you don't want to, I mean, because my goal is that we're going to come back and kind of give an overview of information to this whole group.
Yeah.
Not that we want to set up something where we're going to have official meetings and minutes and notes because it's going to become too much work for each of us.
Simplicity
Correct, yeah.
is the name of the game. Yeah, great.
Okay, that's 3. Anything else? Good. Okay, let's open it up to public comments.
You have to come up to the table, Bruce.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Bruce Stevens, a member of the planning board. So there's a meeting come up here in this building, well, actually at the BRC, a week from Thursday, so the 15th. So the planning board had applied with the help of the town planner and Rockingham Planning Commission to the Office of State Planning 2 years ago. We got $60,000 or $40,000 the first year and $60,000 this calendar year to look at our housing ordinances in town to see how we might want to change them. And we all know there's been a state law on the books for quite a number of years, probably 8 or 10 years, saying that essentially that your town has to provide an opportunity for many different economic classes of residents. You know, we call it affordable housing. Sometimes that has bad connotations, but essentially to look at some of these options. So the state has given us $100,000. We've been working with a contractor to come up with questions and options for changing some of our ordinance to become more compliant with state law and maybe more compliant with the wishes of the townspeople if they are looking to include some options for housing that may not all be in the $1 million range. So Thursday night, next Thursday night the 15th at the BRC, we're going to have a forum.
5 to 7.
And we sure hope that we get some participation from townspeople. It's been noticed in the Brentwood newsletter a couple times, on the website.
There are posters up all over town.
There are. So, hopefully we get a response because we do have to give a report back on what we're spending this money for. And hopefully we'll come up with some good suggestions for March town meeting next year to make some of these changes.
It's from 5 to 7 p.m. over at the BRC. It's a drop-in forum, so you don't have
Yes,
to be
you
there
don't
right at 5.
Correct.
You can leave whenever you want to. My understanding is that there's going to be kind of stations almost with different
That's
topics
correct.
in each one.
Mhm. So I know you guys had, it was meetings, people, you got so many subcommittees going, there's meetings all the time. But this would be one, this is really the only big public forum that we're going to have, so that would be it.
Well, we're non-compliant with the state
We are.
currently. We are not.
We are not compliant with workforce housing, right?
That's correct. And so this gives us an opportunity as a community to look at all our options in a very positive way by bringing in, younger families that can afford at the average income level. And it's just a good opportunity for everybody to come to this meeting to see what our options are, because eventually we're going to have to do something. If not, we're going to be forced to do something.
When we say we need to do something, the planning board
Right.
taking in all this information, but we can only propose changes. The
That's
townspeople it'll be a ballot vote next March, like all zoning.
And it's
ordinances
just a
have been
great
passed.
opportunity.
Yes, so maybe we got to see where we're going. And we saw in the Brentwood Newsletter, there was a great article that was published by the Brentwood Newsletter. Jack Mitchell had a concern about the tax cap, and Jim, your board had presented some information on the other side, or some little more information on it. And so the town's kind of come to a crossroads. Are we going to be like the town of Rye exclusively and not look to cause people or allow opportunities for other economic classes to come into town? We're coming to that.
Or for people to stay here. It's not even looking for
Stay
new
here,
people
yes.
to come
Oh,
in.
that-
There are
that's a
people
good
who are
point.
living in larger homes than they need because their families
And,
have grown up and gone. They don't need,
Doug-
there's nowhere for them to go in
Well, that's
town.
it. And Doug's going to have a little information on this other project we're working on. But I heard Jim talk about tonight about the unexpended fund balance and to have like a 5-year plan. And of course, your group has been involved in with the planning board on the capital improvement plan, where we're looking out 6-7 years away. And
That's $8,500.
yeah, so I've just encouraged this board to maybe take it in terms of looking ahead like that, to maybe talk to the town planner. Maybe even an RPC representative would come to the one of your meetings and talk about projected growth in Brentwood. Because as a longtime planning board member, I've seen a lot of very recent development. 70 houses, or 72 houses over on North Road, and then approximately another 72 on Mill Road that are being built out. So we've seen this huge rise in revenue over the last 7 or 8 years. And due to the fact that the River Run, the Mill Road project, is going to take another couple of years to be built out, that will continue to provide revenue to the town. But my big concern is that this year, the planning board's only had one lot subdivision come before us, and so far in 2025. And looking over the next couple of months, I don't see any new applications. So my concern is that we're riding this big revenue increase bubble, but at a certain point, because we've used up all our big tracts of land, our building activity is going to, on a downslope like the Swayze school population, but our costs are going to just keep
Spiral.
so
Absolutely.
I don't want to tell you that, but if you could have some people come in that are knowledgeable and give you some factual information on where growth is expected to go, it might be interesting to note.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Yes, thank you.
And then Doug's got another cost-saving option here.
I'm being put on the spot and I didn't bring my notes. So we're talking about the Green Snow program, and UNH is coming in to do a presentation seminar next Wednesday on the 14th, 6 o'clock. Thank you, Becky. And it's more in terms of the distribution of salt and sand in the town and environmental aspects of our bridges and waterways. And it's where a lot of communities are going as far as trying to save money. It's not an overnight type thing. It's a buy-in program with a little bit of a investment, which we just made with the town truck, which is calibrated, which gives us the opportunity to monitor what we're putting on our roads and how we're doing it. With the idea of elimination of sand. A lot of communities up north have done this, and they are saving money in buying that. There is a combination salt, brine investment in the future, but it's not as much, and it's not as detrimental to the environment as we are currently doing. Although our highway department does an excellent job in maintaining what they're putting down and how they're doing it. It's giving us an opportunity to open our eyes for the future of our children and the younger families.
We've heard, a lot about Gray Bay contamination, and Brentwood has 8 bridges, on town roads, and all that water containing the sand salt go right into the river. Yes, I agree that the Brentwood DBW has done a great job, but there are these new scientific ways of saving on material and cost, and we all know that in the next short period of time here, a number of years, we're going to have a big turnover in our whole highway department employee situation.
Can you please not talk about that? I can't handle more turnover right now.
Well, it's a fact of life, so we're trying to get ahead of the curve so that as we progress.
There's a tax cap. We cannot hire more people.
Well, we have.
Well, this
some other ideas.
presentation was, we went, the highway department went, and 2 of the planning board members went. So it's very informative. It's enlightening. You may walk away and say, nah, there's no buy-in for me. But if you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the growth.
And that's at next Wednesday's
Next
conservation
Wednesday,
meeting?
6 o'clock
p.m.
here.
Okay.
And is that going to be taped, Becky, or usual? This podcast. Okay. And so, Jack, if you're watching tonight,
No, it's happening right now.
it will be.
Okay.
It's right now.
Directly.
It's live right now.
Yeah.
Super.
And you can definitely, I think all the ones that are live then get stored on the YouTube and then, or the YouTube channel, not.
You can click it and say,
Yeah.
oh, I want to watch this.
No,
And then you can watch it after.
in all sincerity, we're not asking, we wouldn't require any more employees. There's no additional employees required to
I'm mostly joking.
run. I hear you. Thank you.
The one thing that I will mention, and just because there's not a workforce housing ordinance, what Doug meant when he said that we could be forced is that if somebody wanted to build something that was reasonable, because we don't have anything, they could build whatever they want, kind of, because there's no.
And the town having control over what we do is very important.
And I know I've talked to both of you about that exact issue, that's what scares me the most, is when we don't have control over, that somebody could come in and do something that none of us want. That's really scary.
Unless
Really scary.
Unless the voters establish an ordinance.
Correct.
The planning board
Which
has
is-
no authority.
I
They
know.
go to Superior Court.
I know,
and the
right.
judge stamps the.
And I think that
Exactly.
message has to get out there, and we need the voters to.
So when I
have
say
things-
we, I don't mean
No.
we as a planning board, we as a community.
And that's what I'm saying, we as a community. Yes,
The best
thank you,
that the
thank
planning
you.
board could do is present the
Right,
zoning option that the
Exactly.
people can then adopt. or
and
not.
So thank you.
thank you both, thank you.
We have a June 9 meeting. Do you want to set up another one? Or can I just make a motion to adjourn?
We didn't do public.
That was public.
Oh, that was it?
Yeah, is
Becky?
any,
You good?
Betsy, you have anything? Anyone else? Okay,
Becky,
well,
you want to talk again?
we're closing public comments
No, you're
then.
good?
She said no.
Once, twice? Great.
what you said about the development bubble, it will be going down. More development doesn't yield a greater tax benefit.
Right.
All the studies show that commercial or residential development always costs more than bringing it in. So there has to be a
Yes.
balance.
Thank you, Becky.
So.
Motion to adjourn.
So
We have-
moved. We'll make a meeting.
Tiny feet?
Another meeting.
We have, the next meeting is on the 9th at 5 PM, right?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay. All in favor of adjourn?
Yep.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we're done. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Oops, I didn't mean to just throw that in front of you, but